Hey guys, tonight we step into the cool shadows of an ancient temple where the air feels heavy with dust and incense and a storm seems to gather even though the sky above Athens is clear. Columns tower around you, carved marble, glowing faintly in torchlight, and you can almost hear the soft flutter of owls' wings echoing through the rafters. This is where Medusa's story begins, not as the monster you know, but as a mortal girl who walked beneath the gaze of the goddess Athena. So take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you don't mind, share your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious where these bedtime journeys are reaching. Now dim, the lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step further inside, tracing your fingers along the grooves of cold marble, feeling the temple's weight pressing down. Outside, the Aegean air is bright and restless, but here the silence is almost alive, as though the goddess herself is listening. Medusa is not yet cursed. She is still a young woman, her hair like flowing night, her beauty so striking that poets whisper about her in taverns. You imagine her kneeling at the altar, offering olive branches, her lips moving in prayers that echo softly beneath the vaulted ceiling. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, watches her with unreadable eyes. Historians still argue whether Medusa was always mortal, a priestess sworn to chastity, or if she was once counted among divine beings herself. Some say she served faithfully in Athena's temple, living in honor of the goddess. Others suggest she was never fully accepted, her beauty a distraction, a danger within sacred walls. What remains certain is that her presence here, in the hush of the temple, is the seed of tragedy to come. A curious tidbit survives in ancient fragments. Some storytellers claimed that when Medusa walked, even the shadows of columns seemed to bend toward her, as though marble itself longed to capture her form. Sculptors dreamed of chiseling her likeness, but none dared fearing Athena's jealousy. It is a detail that feels like gossip from the ancient world, yet it carries the weight of foreshadowing the idea that beauty alone can provoke the anger of gods. You wander past bronze braziers where fires smolder low. Priests move like ghosts through the halls, their robes whispering against the floor. Somewhere deep inside, Medusa tends to the sacred tasks of a temple maiden, cleaning altars, weaving garlands, grinding powders for incense. She lives a life of ritual order and silence, yet you sense the tension growing like a storm cloud on the horizon, the awareness that her presence here is too bright, too human, too captivating to be ignored forever. The temple itself tells its own story. Carvings along the walls show Athena's victories, the slaying of giants, the taming of monsters, the triumph of wisdom over chaos. Medusa must have seen these every day, must have traced the grooves with her eyes until the figures lived in her mind. Perhaps she even believed they protected her, that by serving Athena she could remain safe beneath that fierce, watchful gaze. But storms brew in silence before they break. You can almost hear the faint rumble of thunder, though no storm cloud darkens the sky outside. This is the hush before everything shatters, the moment when Medusa is still human, still whole, still unaware of the fate that will twist her beauty into terror. You linger there with her in the shadows, sensing Athena's presence all around. The torches flicker, shadows stretch and bend, and the marble floor feels colder under your bare feet. Medusa kneels again, her hair spilling like ink across her shoulders, her prayers rising softly. For now, she is only a woman seeking the favor of the gods. But you can feel the shift approaching, the weight of divine wrath pressing closer with every heartbeat. The storm in the temple has not yet broken, and so you step back in time further into Medusa's youth, when her name was spoken with admiration rather than fear. Imagine her walking through the crowded streets of Athens, the sun gilding her hair eyes, catching the light like polished stone. Passers-by pause, merchants fall silent mid-haggle, and even poets lose their words. She is known first not as a monster, but as a marvel, a mortal woman whose beauty seems sculpted by the gods themselves. The city hums around her sandals, scuffing on stone vendors, calling out about olives and figs, sailors singing as they mend their nets. Yet your gaze follows Medusa. The stories say she drew eyes the way flame draws moths. Some whispered she was blessed by the gods, others muttered she was cursed by attracting too much notice. Historians still argue whether her legendary beauty is truth or poetic exaggeration, a tale grown brighter with retelling. What we know is that in myth, beauty is never innocent. It is a force as dangerous as a sword. You wander through a marble courtyard where young women weave garlands of laurel leaves. Medusa sits among them, fingers deft, but her laughter seems to rise above the rest. Even among her peers, she is singled out, though she does not seek it. Men linger by the gates, pretending to admire the gardens, but stealing glances at her. Some say even kings and warriors travelled to glimpse her face, hoping her gaze might linger on them. A curious tidbit preserved in old fragments tells how sculptors begged her for a sitting, wishing to carve her likeness in marble. Some claimed they could not chisel fast enough to keep up with her movements, that even stone longed to follow her. Whether true or not, it reveals the power of her presence. She did not merely exist, she altered the space around her. But admiration breeds envy. As you walk through the marketplace, you notice women whispering behind baskets of fruit, their eyes narrowed. To them, Medusa's beauty is a threat, a disruption of balance. Jealousy sharpens tongues into daggers. Perhaps you can hear the murmurs already that no mortal should outshine goddesses, that her beauty itself is arrogance, even if she never claimed it. The myths tell different versions of how the gods regarded her. Some suggest Poseidon's gaze fell upon her first drawn, not just by desire, but by the challenge of claiming someone whose beauty rivaled divine forms. Others argue it was Athena who grew wary, her temple priestess, drawing too much attention, disturbing the reverence owed to the goddess alone. Historians still argue whether Medusa's downfall began with her beauty alone, or with the tangled jealousies it awakened in both mortals and immortals. At night, you follow her to the temple steps where the stars glow above like scattered pearls. She kneels before Athena's altar, her voice soft, almost trembling. She prays for guidance, for strength, perhaps even for invisibility in a world that cannot look away. The flame of the lamp wavers in the breeze, and her shadow stretches tall against the wall as if the goddess herself is watching closely. In the stillness you sense the weight of her fate. Beauty in myth is never a gift freely given. It is a test, a burden, sometimes even a curse. You imagine her hair tumbling down her back, her eyes lowered in humility, and you know already how cruelly this moment will twist. The city sleeps, but rumors do not. They move through alleyways and across oceans, carried by sailors, embroidered by storytellers. Already the seeds of legend are being planted. To some, Medusa is a vision of grace, to others a danger whose radiance tempts even gods. The same light that gilds her in admiration begins to cast shadows of fear. As dawn spills across the horizon, you find yourself back at the temple again, where Medusa moves quietly among sacred tasks. The storm is still distant, but its pressure builds with every whispered rumor, every envious glance, every divine gaze that lingers too long. You feel it in your chest, the sense that beauty alone is not enough to keep her safe, and that soon it will become the very weapon used against her. The temple looms before you again, its white marble columns rising like frozen waves against the darkening sky. Tonight the air feels different, heavy, charged, as though thunder hides behind the stars. Inside, torches sputter in their bronze holders, shadows flickering across carved walls. You step softly across the polished floor, and there among the sacred offerings you see Medusa. She moves with careful grace, her hands arranging garlands of olive leaves on Athena's altar. She is still a priestess of the goddess, bound to a vow of purity, a vessel of devotion. But tonight, the silence shivers. The myths tell of a forbidden moment here, an encounter that changes everything. Some stories say Poseidon, lord of the sea, came into Athena's temple, drawn by Medusa's beauty, and claimed her as his own. Others describe it differently, as an act of defiance, a god's arrogance clashing against a goddess's pride. Historians still argue whether this myth should be read as an allegory of power struggles between rival cults, Athena's and Poseidon's, or simply as another tragic tale of divine desire. You stand in the temple, the air heavy with salt, as if the sea itself has crept inland, and you feel how fragile sacred walls become when gods contend. Medusa does not resist destiny, she is caught in it. You imagine the terror in her eyes as Poseidon's shadow towers above her, the marble echoing with a sound like crashing waves. The temple trembles, the garlands fall, and the silence of sanctity is broken. The goddess is not present in body, but you sense her fury crackle through the air, sharper than any thunderbolt. A curious tidbit lingers in ancient accounts. Some say the dolphins painted on temple walls near Athens changed color, after that night their outlines fading as if ashamed. Others whispered that owls abandoned the rafters of Athena's shrines, refusing to return. Whether these details are myth or embellishment, they reveal how deeply the story struck those who told it. For them, this was no ordinary transgression, it was sacrilege. You kneel beside Medusa as she collapses before the altar, her prayers broken, her devotion shattered. The lamp flames twist in the draught, and the scent of olive oil thickens in the air. She has done nothing but exist in the wrong moment, yet, in myth, mortals rarely escape unscathed when gods clash. Outside the city stirs uneasily. Priests whisper of omens of Athena's anger, rising like a storm tide. In taverns, rumors spread. Some blame Medusa for luring Poseidon, others pity her as a victim of divine cruelty. You feel how quickly admiration shifts to accusation, how fragile reputation becomes in the hands of the gods. The temple floor grows colder under your feet, as though marble itself recoils from what has happened. Statues of Athena seem to glare down, their stone eyes unblinking, their lips curved in silent judgment. The sacred space has been profaned, and punishment is inevitable. You step back into the night air, the stars veiled by fast-moving clouds. The wind tastes of salt, though the sea lies miles away. Somewhere Athena watches, her wisdom sharpened into rage. And Medusa, unaware of how merciless that rage will be, still kneels before the altar, her hair falling like spilled ink across her shoulders, her prayers trembling into the void. The storm finally breaks. You walk again into the temple, but this time the air feels alive, charged with a fury that hums against your skin. Athena's presence fills the space, though her figure is unseen, her wrath descending not on Poseidon, who had invaded her sanctuary, but on Medusa, the mortal who bore the weight of being present. The torches flare, shadows writhe, and you sense the goddess's judgment taking form. Medusa kneels her hands, clutching the cold marble altar, tears streaking her cheeks. She whispers prayers, but the words crumble as the air around her twists. You can almost hear serpents hissing before they appear, an invisible chorus that coils tighter with every heartbeat. Her long, dark hair stirs in a phantom wind, then writhes strand by strand, transforming into living snakes. Their scales glisten like molten bronze, their tongues flickering with venomous hunger. You watch in astonishment and horror as beauty becomes terror, flowing locks replaced by serpentine coils. Historians still argue whether this transformation was intended as punishment or protection. Some scholars suggest Athena cursed Medusa so that no man mortal or divine could touch her again. Others believe the curse was vengeance, a cruel reminder of divine justice twisted against the powerless. In either case, the result is undeniable. Medusa's hair now hisses with life, her very presence radiating dread. A curious tidbit lingers in older myths. It is said that snakes in Greece were often linked to the underworld creatures that slithered between life and death. To give Medusa such hair was not merely to disfigure her beauty, but to bind her to a realm of shadows and fear. Children in ancient villages would whisper that if they heard snakes rustling at night, it was Medusa wandering nearby. Her reflection tells the cruelest truth. She stumbles toward a polished bronze basin filled with water, desperate to see herself. The surface ripples, then steadies, and her gasp echoes through the temple. Her once celebrated face is the same, but framed now by writhing serpents. Her eyes, once luminous, seem sharper, glowing faintly as if holding some new and dangerous power. She jerks back, nearly overturning the basin, the snakes snapping at their own reflections. You follow her as she flees into the night. The city recoils from her as she passes. Merchants clutch their children. Women shriek, men turn away in terror. No one dares come close. Where once her beauty gathered crowds, now her curse scatters them like dry leaves in wind. Her loneliness is immediate, absolute. She has become untouchable, both feared and despised. The transformation deepens. The first man who dares approach her after the curse never lives to tell of it. He steps forward with trembling courage, perhaps hoping to strike her down, perhaps to test the truth of the whispers. She turns her gaze upon him, and he freezes mid-breath. His limbs stiffen, his skin pales, and within moments he is stone, his last expression carved forever in horror. Word spreads quickly. Medusa is no longer a woman, but a monster whose glance can petrify. The power terrifies even her, for she never wished to wield it. Each glance becomes a weapon, every meeting of eyes a death sentence. You sense her withdrawing further into isolation, driven away from temples, from towns, from human touch. Athena's temple grows cold in her absence, yet the goddess remains unrepentant. Marble carvings depict her with an unshaken face, spear raised, while whispers of Medusa's curse ripple outward across Greece. Some pity her, others relish her downfall, but none deny the power of her new form. You walk with her into the wilderness, the snakes hissing softly in the wind. The night is vast, the stars cruelly bright, and Medusa is alone. Once praised, once envied, she now bears a curse heavier than any mortal should endure. The storm has passed, but its scars are permanent. The world will never look at her the same way again, if it dares to look at her at all. You wander with her into the desolate edges of Greece, where rocky hills give way to wild coastlines and caves hollowed out by restless waves. Medusa does not choose. Exile chooses her. Wherever she passes, terror follows, for her eyes now carry death in silence. Travelers speak of a maiden whose gaze turns flesh to stone, and villages bolt their doors at the mere whisper of her name. You feel the chill of isolation clinging to her shoulders like a second skin. The curse reveals itself in slow, dreadful moments. A shepherd lost in the hills stumbles upon her cave. His dog barks wildly, then falls silent. When she steps into view, her snakes coil and hiss, and the shepherd freezes where he stands, his body hardening as though gripped by invisible fingers. You watch his eyes glaze over his skin, pale into marble, until he stands motionless, a statue carved in mid-fear. Medusa recoils horrified by what she has done, yet powerless to undo it. Historians still argue whether her deadly gaze was meant as a punishment alone, or if it gave her a form of defense. To some, Athena's curse was a cruelty ensuring that Medusa would be hunted and feared. To others, it was a twisted kind of gift. No one could harm her now without risking petrification. You can almost hear the scholars' debates echoing across centuries. Is she victim or protector or something? Between a curious tidbit survives in coastal folklore. Fishermen claimed that when they pulled up their nets near certain rocky shores, the fish inside was stiff, their scales dulled as if they had turned to stone. They swore Medusa's glare had reached even beneath the water, freezing life where it swam. True or not, the tale spread, adding another layer of dread to her legend. You follow her deeper into her cave, where the walls drip with salt water, and the air smells of damp stone. Statues litter the entrance, not crafted by artisans, but created unwillingly by her gaze. Warriors who sought glory, bandits who hoped for treasure, wanderers who strayed too near, all frozen mid-motion, their expressions twisted in terror. They stand like a grotesque gallery guardians. She never wished for each one a reminder of her loneliness. Medusa herself shrinks away from their company. She avoids her own reflection in pools of water, afraid to see the snakes that writhe where her hair once flowed. At night, she curls in the darkness, listening to the hiss of serpents that never sleep. Her once radiant voice, once filled with laughter in the streets of Athens, now fades into whispers that echo only against stone. Yet still she remains human beneath the curse. She remembers the sound of markets, the warmth of the sun, the kindness of hands that once reached for her without fear. You feel her longing as she presses her palms against the cave wall, as though the stone might soften and return her to the world she has lost. Outside, stories multiply. Parents warn their children never to wander too far, lest they meet the Gorgon. Sailors whisper of her island as they pass, keeping their eyes down, fearful that even the mention of her name might draw her gaze. Poets exaggerate her terror. Sculptors carve her face with wings and tusks, though none of them have truly seen her. Her image grows monstrous in memory, long before she becomes myth. You stand at the cave mouth as the sun sets over the sea. Statues cast long shadows across the ground, their frozen eyes staring endlessly westward. Medusa lingers within hidden, her form blurred by the gloom. She is no longer mortal as she once was, yet neither is she a god. She is something new, something the world fears and cannot understand. And as the waves crash against the rocks below, you feel the weight of her curse, deepen a power that isolates her, even as it protects her from harm. The night deepens, and the cave echoes with restless hisses. You move quietly past the statues clustered near the entrance, their marble faces frozen mid-scream, and step further inside where the shadows thicken. Here you find not just Medusa, but her kin, the Gorgons, the sisters who share her blood and her curse. They are Stheno and Euryale, beings older than memory, described as immortal, where Medusa alone is mortal. Their wings stretch wide in the dark feathers, catching stray shafts of moonlight, and their bronze claws scrape lightly against the stone floor. You watch them gather around her, the snakes in their hair, hissing in strange harmony. Though their faces bear the same terrible power, there is something different in how they wear it. Stheno's eyes blaze with fury, her mouth curled into a perpetual snarl. Euryale's voice rises like a wail in the night, her lament said to shatter the air itself. And Medusa, youngest, most vulnerable, sits quietly, her serpents restless, but her gaze lowered, still clinging to scraps of humanity. The myths describe the Gorgons as a trio of dread guardians of a terrible threshold between life and death. Historians still argue whether they originated as sea demons from older myths, or whether their tale was born from ancient fears of female power turned dangerous. Some suggest they once represented protectors' spirits carved on shields to ward off evil before the myths recast them as monsters to be slain. Standing here, you sense all those possibilities flicker in the torchlight. A curious tidbit comes from fragments of Hesiod. He described how the Gorgons dwelt beyond ocean, at night's edge, guardians of the world's boundaries. For sailors and wanderers, their existence marked the line between the known and the unknowable. To look upon them was not just to risk petrification, but to step beyond the safety of mortal understanding. The sisters speak softly among themselves, voices low, echoing like wind through broken stone. They comfort Medusa in their own harsh way, but there is no mistaking the sorrow in their words. They are bound by blood and curse, yet they know she carries a weight. Unlike theirs, she can die while they endure. That difference shapes everything. You see it in the way they glance at her, as though already mourning a fate they cannot prevent. Outside the island lies quiet waves foaming against jagged rocks. Sailors steer wide around its shores, for they believe it haunted. In taverns, storytellers embellish details, wings that blot out the moonfangs, dripping venom eyes that shatter stone. The legends grow darker with every retelling, though here in the cave you see, the truth is both more ordinary and more tragic. They are not demons, but sisters condemned to live apart from the world, bound together by the fear they inspire. Medusa listens to them, yet her silence is heavier than their words. She still remembers her life as a maiden, the sound of markets, the touch of mortal hands. Her sisters, immortal and eternal, do not share that memory. They cannot fully understand her grief, for they have never known what it means to live as a mortal, to hope for a life beyond endless night. You sit with them in the cave, hearing the snakes shift and hiss, feeling the air vibrate faintly with Euryale's lament. The sisters look outward beyond the cave mouth toward the horizon where stars fade into the sea. They are guardians of nothing and everything, their very existence a warning to those who dare to cross boundaries meant to remain closed. As dawn creeps over the waves, the sisters retreat deeper into shadow, their wings folding like cloaks around their forms. Medusa lingers at the threshold, her gaze cast downward, her snakes swaying with the morning breeze. You realize that this strange family bound by fear and legend is all she has left. And though she clings to them, the world beyond the cave is already stirring heroes whispering of quests, kings dreaming of glory. The sisters' vigil cannot hold forever. The sea stretches wide before you, restless and grey, its waves hammering against jagged rocks. Sailors know these coasts, though they wish they didn't. Their ships creak uneasily as they skirt the shore's oars, dipping in unison, eyes fixed firmly on the horizon. You join them crouched low in the deck's shadow, listening to the whispers that pass from mouth to mouth. They speak of islands haunted not by storms but by the Gorgon herself, Medusa whose hair hisses with serpents and whose glance freezes men in an instant. The sailors' tales grow as long as the voyages themselves. One insists he saw statues rising from the cliffs, warriors, and hunters turned to stone, their mouths still open in cries that never ended. Another swears the very gulls that flew too close fell stiff from the air, crashing into the surf as lifeless rocks. You know these are embellishments, but even exaggeration holds a kernel of truth. The men grip their oars tighter, rowing as if each stroke can push them farther from her imagined gaze. Historians still argue whether the myth of Medusa's island came from real geography. Some suggest it may have been inspired by coastal outcroppings in the Aegean where oddly shaped rocks looked like frozen men. Others point to abandoned temples or ruined cities whose statues gave rise to stories of petrification. Whatever the origin, the image of her rocky island persists a place at the edge of maps where sailors feared to tread. A curious tidbit floats among their stories. Some sailors left offerings of mirrors tied to the sterns of their ships, hoping that if Medusa's eyes ever fell on them, her gaze would strike her own reflection instead. Small bronze discs, polished until they gleamed, bobbed in the spray like sunlit shields. Whether it worked or not, none dared to test the charm too closely. You stand at the ship's railing, the salt spray biting your lips, and glance toward the distant cliffs. The land seems empty, but the sailors mutter that her presence can be felt even at sea. They claim the waves grow rougher near her island, as if Poseidon himself still circles her in silent possession. The wind moans through the rigging, low and mournful, and the men pull their cloaks tighter. On the island itself, the cave yawns dark against the cliffs. Inside, statues crowd the entrance guardians, born not of art, but of terror. The sailors imagine their comrades among them lost forever, and their songs falter at the thought. You picture the lonely figure within snakes, shifting across her brow, listening to the sea's endless roar. Her solitude has become the sailor's nightmare, her curse magnified into a legend that spreads from port to port like wildfire. Back in taverns along the coast, storytellers lean close to flickering lamps, their voices dropping as they describe the island. Children press against their mothers' eyes wide, while soldiers scoff but drink more heavily. The island grows in the imagination until it becomes not just a place, but a threshold between mortal lands and something darker, where even courage turns brittle. The sailor's fear spreads to you as the ship passes by. You keep your head bowed, though you know she cannot see you from such distance. Still the thought of her eyes, scanning the waves, searching for intruders, lingers like a chill. The ship creaks, the waves slap hard against the hull, and you feel the entire crew's relief when the cliffs finally fade behind the horizon. Yet as the wind shifts, carrying the salt tang of the sea, you realize the fear is not gone. It clings like mist, a reminder that the island waits still brooding in silence, its lonely guardian watching. The sailors may flee, but the story follows them whispered on every shore until Medusa's shadow grows larger than the island itself. You climb the rocky cliffs of that dreaded island, the sea winds battering against your face until you reach the cavern, where silence reigns heavier than stone. Statues crowd the entrance, heroes once bold, now forever stiffened into guardians against their own will. Some clutch broken swords, others raise shields mid-motion, their expressions locked in the moment, courage turned to terror. This is where the tales are born, and tonight you wander among them, hearing in your mind the stories of those who dared and failed. The first figures to seek her were nameless warriors eager to prove themselves. They crept into the cave with blades gleaming, certain their skill could outmatch a cursed woman. Yet each froze where they stood, caught by a glance before a strike could fall. Their failure whispered through the land, feeding Medusa's legend. Then came others, Hunters, mercenaries, and men who sought her head for wealth, they too littered the ground around her lair, turned to stone before they could even scream. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect real rituals, perhaps dramatized initiations or warnings about hubris. Some suggest the statues in myth may have symbolized reminders of arrogance punished by divine power. Others treat them as poetic flourishes, proof of how myths grew darker with every retelling. Whatever their root, the message is clear. Mortals who measured themselves against gods and monsters often found their courage carved into stone. A curious tidbit clings to one version. It was said that some of the statues were so lifelike that birds perched on their shoulders and nested in their hair, unaware they perched on men rather than marble. Travelers whispered that if you approached too closely, you could still hear faint echoes of their last breaths trapped in stone. Whether true or not, the image lingers as you brush your fingers along their cold, unyielding faces. Inside the cave, Medusa sits apart, curled against the wall, her serpents restless. She does not seek battle, yet battle comes to her. The warriors arrive with loud voices, their armor clattering, the smell of sweat and fear mixing in the air. She raises her head and silence falls, instant absolute. Another statue joins the grim collection. Each failed attempt only deepens her solitude, for victory brings her no comfort, only another reminder of how the world sees her, not as a woman, but as a prize to be won or a monster to be slain. From afar, kings listen to these tales and weigh their options. Some dream of glory, imagining their names forever honored if they can end her terror. Others see opportunity, a chance to test young champions. To them, Medusa is both a threat and a challenge, her cave a proving ground where the bold may rise or fall. You step deeper into the shadows, hearing the hiss of her hair like dry reeds in the wind. Her eyes glimmer faintly in the dark, though she avoids your gaze. The statues keep their vigil unblinking, as though reminding you of what happens to those who try and fail. And you realize the true cruelty of her curse. She cannot live among mortals, yet she cannot escape them either, for their ambition drives them into her cave again and again. The wind howls through the cliff mouth as the sun sinks beyond the horizon, painting the statues in blood-red light. You stand in that eerie twilight, surrounded by men who once thought themselves heroes, their bravery now frozen forever. And within the darkness, Medusa remains, her heart beating softly, her sorrow deeper than stone. The statues stand in their eerie vigil, yet the world beyond Medusa's cave is shifting. Far across the sea, in the kingdom of Argos, a young man named Perseus hears her name for the first time. You walk with him through a bustling hall where braziers flicker shadows rising against marble walls. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat and the hum of court intrigue. Here, kings weigh fates as easily as they weigh gold, and Perseus is caught in their schemes. The tyrant Polydectes, ruler of Seriphos, sets the trap. His desire for Danae, Perseus's mother, burns too fiercely, but Perseus stands as an obstacle, and so the king demands a gift no man could hope to deliver: the head of Medusa. Court laughter fills the hall, cruel and sharp, as if the impossible task itself were the jest. Yet Perseus, proud and defiant, accepts the challenge. He does not yet know the weight of the quest, only that he will not bow to mockery. Historians still argue whether the myth of Perseus reflects older initiation rituals, youths proving manhood by facing trials, symbolic monsters, rather than real foes. Others see it as a tale woven to explain constellations, with Perseus's victories written into the stars. You stand beside him now, and the story feels less like allegory and more like the trembling of a real young man staring into an impossible future. A curious tidbit appears in later versions of the myth. Some storytellers claimed that when Perseus first heard Medusa's name, he shivered as if cold, though the hall around him was warm with fire. They said her legend carried a chill all its own reaching across seas to touch him before he ever set foot on her island. Perseus leaves the hall, heart-pounding cloak snapping in the sea wind. He is still barely more than a boy, yet the burden of kings and gods weighs heavy already. He prays beneath the stars, his voice lifted into the night. You feel his words scatter across the heavens, reaching ears far more powerful than his own. For it is not alone that he will walk into Medusa's shadow. The gods themselves have begun to stir. In Olympus, Athena watches. Her eyes are cold, her mind sharp. She has never forgotten the desecration of her temple, nor forgiven the mortal who bore the curse. Her plan forms in silence. If Medusa must fall, then it will be by the hand of a hero chosen carefully. Elsewhere, Hermes, swift and clever, tilts his head in curiosity. He too watches Perseus, sensing in him the spark of daring that might amuse the gods. Back in his chamber, Perseus sharpens a simple sword, though he knows it is useless. The thought of Medusa chills him more than any steel could protect. He paces, restless, every heartbeat echoing like a drum of war. Around him, the sea crashes against Seriphos' shores, as though Poseidon himself stirs, angry that his domain's secrets will soon be challenged. The court still laughs behind him, convinced he will never return. But you walk beside Perseus as he steps into the unknown, carrying only courage and desperation. His journey has begun, though he cannot yet imagine the snakes, the statues, or the silent cave where fate waits for him. The night sky arches above, constellations glittering. One day his name will be written among them. For now it is only a whisper, a promise drifting with the salt wind. And you, standing at the edge of the sea, feel the vast distance between boy and legend narrowing with every step he takes. The sea stretches wide and the gods descend. You walk beside Perseus as he kneels on a rocky shore, the waves frothing white against the stones, his prayers carried out into the salt wind. His voice trembles, for he knows no mortal can face Medusa unaided. Yet even as he whispers, the air shimmers and the gods answer. Athena appears first, her form shining in silver light, her spear resting in her hand, her shield polished brighter than the moon. She regards Perseus with a gaze that both chills and steadies. Without a word, she presents him with that very shield, its bronze surface polished to a mirror's clarity. Do not meet her eyes, her voice murmurs like steel on stone. Use this to see her, and her gaze will fall upon herself instead. Then Hermes steps lightly onto the shore, winged sandals barely touching the foam. His smile is quick, his movements swifter still. He places the sandals at Perseus's feet, their feathers stirring in the wind. These will carry you above the waves and over the earth, he says, swifter than fear itself. And in his other hand he holds a curved sword, sharp as a crescent moon, forged for a task no ordinary blade could bear. Historians still argue whether these divine gifts reflect rituals of kingship or initiation, where weapons and symbols passed from gods to heroes marked transitions into manhood. Others claim they symbolize older myths, woven together: Athena's wisdom, Hermes's speed, Perseus's daring. To the ancient mind, each tool was more than an object, it was a thread binding the hero to the divine. A curious tidbit lingers in some versions. Perseus was also given a cap of invisibility, a helm once belonging to Hades himself. In those tellings he could vanish entirely, slipping unseen through danger. The helm, dark and glimmering like the night sky itself, made him as shadow among shadows. Not all sources agree he carried it, but the image endures a reminder of how myth gathers details like barnacles on a ship's hull, never quite the same from one port to another. Perseus straps the sandals to his feet, the leather soft yet firm, the wings quivering as if alive. He grips the sword, its edge catching the moonlight with a sharp gleam. Last he raises the shield, staring into its mirrored face until he sees not himself, but the stars reflected there. The gifts weigh little, yet he feels their power settle into his bones. Athena's presence lingers like cool stone, her hand briefly resting on his shoulder. Hermes laughs softly, the sound like rushing water, and then both gods vanish into the night, leaving Perseus alone once more. Yet he is no longer merely a boy, he is a chosen vessel, armed with divine favor. You follow him as he takes his first tentative steps in the sandals. His feet lift from the earth, the wings carrying him upward with a rush of wind. The sea falls away beneath him, the cliffs shrink, and for the first time he feels the sky open wide. The world spreads vast and uncertain, and somewhere ahead a cave waits with statues and serpents. His heart pounds not only with fear, but with the thrill of flight. The night air is cool against your face as you soar with him. Stars wheel slowly overhead, ancient and patient, as if watching to see whether this mortal boy will succeed where so many have failed. Below, villages flicker with lamplight, unaware that a story is already being written across the heavens. You glance at Perseus's face, and it is set now, determined, though still shadowed by doubt. He clutches the shield tightly, the reflection of the moon trembling on its surface. Every beat of the sandal's wings takes him farther from safety, closer to the cave of the Gorgon, and you drifting beside him in the night feel how myth itself begins to shift, no longer the story of a cursed maiden alone, but the tale of a boy armed by gods flying toward destiny. The sandals beat steadily, wings whispering against the wind as you soar with Perseus over seas and lands. The night below glimmers faintly, scattered with torchlight from villages, the glow of hearth fires hidden in valleys. He holds the polished shield tight against his chest sword, at his side cloak fluttering in the high air. The journey has begun in earnest now, and each passing mile feels heavier with the weight of destiny. Beneath him stretch landscapes both familiar and strange. You drift above rugged coastlines, rocky islands ringed with foam, and then over fertile plains where farmers sleep beneath star-studded skies. He passes temples gleaming faintly under moonlight, places where worshippers pray for safe harvests, unaware a young hero is hurtling toward legend. You see his eyes dart downward at each landmark, perhaps wondering if one day stories will mark his own path across the earth. The sandals carry him not just over Greece, but far into unknown lands. He must seek the Gorgons, and they live at the edge of the world, beyond the reach of ordinary maps. Sailors speak of it in whispers, a place where night and day blur, where the sun brushes too close to the horizon, and shadows linger unnaturally long. Perseus presses onward, knowing that only by leaving all familiar things behind can he hope to find Medusa. Historians still argue whether this journey reflects real geography, the edge of Libya perhaps, or islands far west beyond the Mediterranean. Some scholars even suggest the myth carried echoes of distant lands known through trade, imagined as places where monsters dwelled. To the ancients, the edges of maps were never blank. They teemed with wonder and dread. A curious tidbit lingers in the stories. On his way, Perseus is said to have met the three grey sisters who shared one tooth and one eye between them. Blind without it, they quarrelled, constantly handing the eye back and forth. Perseus, clever and quick, snatched it from them mid-exchange and bargained for knowledge. Trembling, they revealed the path to the Gorgon's lair, warning him of the horrors that lay ahead. The tale feels like a riddle, a reminder that wit and cunning matter as much as strength. As the sandals bear him onward, you hear the rush of wind in your ears, smell the salt of seas and the dust of deserts. Perseus clings to his shield, glimpsing himself reflected faintly in its mirror sheen. Yet he avoids his own eyes, remembering Athena's warning the shield must be his window, not his vanity. Already he trains himself to look indirectly, practicing the discipline that will one day save his life. The journey is long, yet it feels like a single breath drawn and released. Days blur into nights, nights into days. At times the sandals seem to tire, wings beating slower, until Perseus drops closer to the earth. He rests briefly, drinking from springs, sharing bread with strangers who never guess the burden he carries. Then he rises again, borne onward by God's gifts, by the whisper of prophecy, by the pull of a story older than himself. At last the air grows stranger, heavier. The horizon darkens unnaturally, clouds swirling where no storm should be. You sense the threshold of the Gorgon's land, a place beyond the reach of ordinary mortals. The air smells sharp, metallic, as though stone itself exhales. Perseus steadies his grip on the sword, the curved blade catching dim light. The sandals beat harder, wings shivering, eager and anxious all at once. You float with him into this twilight land where shadows never fully lift. Somewhere ahead waits Medusa, her snakes restless, her cave filled with silent witnesses carved from men. Perseus exhales slowly, lips pressed thin, his heart a steady drumbeat in the hush. The journey is nearly done, but the true test, the clash between mortal and monster, between curse and courage, has only just begun. The air thickens as you and Perseus cross into the realm of twilight, where the horizon never seems to brighten fully nor sink into true night. The land feels wrong beneath you, stone ridges jagged like broken teeth, cliffs streaked with strange colors as if the earth itself was scarred by flame. The sandals carry Perseus low over the terrain, wings beating anxiously, their feathers whispering against the restless wind. Every shadow seems alive here, every sound sharp enough to make your heart stumble. He descends into a desolate valley where the grass crunches underfoot like dry bone. The silence presses in, heavy, unbroken, except by the faint rustle of his cloak. Statues litter the ground, men, women, even animals, frozen mid-stride, mid-gesture, their faces twisted with final emotion. Some clutch shields, others reach desperately toward the sky, all trapped in an eternity of stillness. You walk among them, the chill sinking into your bones. These are not sculptures. These are Medusa's victims, each one proof that the stories are true. Perseus keeps his eyes low, training them on the mirrored shield Athena gave him. The polished bronze reflects enough to guide his steps, its surface catching distorted glimpses of stone faces, but never her. His fingers tighten on the hilt of his curved blade, and you feel his breath steady in his chest. Historians still argue about the meaning of this twilight landscape. Some claim it represents the edge of the known world, a symbolic threshold between life and death, where the Gorgons guarded passage to the underworld. Others see it as poetic exaggeration, a mythic geography invented to heighten the hero's danger. Standing here, though, you feel the air itself resist your presence, as if the land does not welcome mortals. A curious tidbit appears in one telling travelers once claimed that dew gathered in the valley could harden into crystal overnight drops of petrified tears, wept by those who encountered the Gorgon's gaze. Small translucent stones were treasured as amulets believed to protect against curses. Whether superstition or truth, the story clings shimmering faintly like the crystals themselves in the half-light. The path winds deeper cliffs towering like watchful giants. Perseus pauses at the sound of serpents hissing faintly in the wind. His sandals hover just above the ground, wings trembling. He knows he must move carefully now, every step a risk, every glance a danger. You follow close, listening to the faint rasp of snakes against stone, the sigh of waves crashing far below the cliffs. The cave mouth yawns ahead, dark and patient, its edges sharp as if carved by claws. The statues cluster more densely near the entrance, a grim honor guard. You can almost imagine them whispering warnings, though their lips are stone. The air grows colder as you approach, damp with the smell of sea spray and old earth. Perseus steadies himself, crouching low, his shield angled carefully. He dares not look directly, only through the mirrored reflection. The sandals flutter silently, now wings slowing, as if they too sense the weight of this place. The hush inside the cave is total, broken only by the faint hiss of serpents. You step into the threshold, heart hammering. Within the shadows you glimpse the outline of a figure sitting still, her head bowed, serpents writhing like restless dreams around her. Medusa waits, though not for him. She waits because there is nowhere else left to go, no other refuge but this cavern of stone and sorrow. Perseus inhales, once steadying shield, lifted blade, ready. The air feels as if it holds its breath alongside him, and you realize this is the moment all stories strain toward a mortal, standing on the edge of the impossible, a cursed woman lost in silence, and a cave filled with statues that whisper what will happen if he fails. The cave swallows you whole, its breath damp and cold, the walls slick with salt, carried from the sea below. Your footsteps echo softly, yet every sound feels amplified like an intruder in a sacred silence. Perseus moves beside you, crouched low, his mirrored shield angled carefully to catch just enough reflection to guide his way. In the polished bronze shadows flicker shapes of statues, curls of serpents, the faint shimmer of movement deeper within. And there she is, Medusa, not the monster sailors whisper about, but a figure bent low in the gloom, her back curved with weariness. The serpents in her hair hiss, faintly restless, but not yet roused. Her head tilts downward as though even she cannot bear her own reflection. For a moment you see not terror but sorrow, a woman carved away from her own life, trapped in exile. The stories call her a beast, yet here she seems almost too human in her loneliness. She lives surrounded by her victims, each statue a grim reminder. You pass by one frozen figure, a man on his knees, shield raised in futile defense. Another clutches at his chest, his eyes wide in shock. They are unintentional companions, silent proof of her curse. Medusa sits among them, caught in the cruel paradox of being both prisoner and jailer of her cave. Historians still argue how ancient Greeks perceived her, whether she was always intended as a villain or whether she represented something deeper, perhaps a warning about the dangers of female power in a patriarchal society. Some point to her as a guardian figure, a threshold spirit whose face was carved on shields and temples for protection. Others insist she was simply a cautionary tale. Yet in this moment, gazing through the shimmer of the shield, you feel her tragedy outweighing her terror. A curious tidbit surfaces in local lore. It was said that when Medusa wept, her tears hardened into amber as they touched the ground. Travelers prized such drops, carrying them as charms against evil. Whether myth or invention, the idea is haunting that even her sorrow becomes something petrified, unchanging. Perseus steadies his breath. He does not move rashly. He studies the mirrored reflection carefully. The serpents twitch, sensing disturbance, their tongues flickering at the scent of intruder. Medusa lifts her head slightly, though her gaze stays low, eyes heavy with grief. You almost want to cry out to warn her to tell him to stop. But this is myth, and myths never yield to mercy. You feel the tension coil like a bowstring drawn too tight. Perseus crouches, his blade-poised shield catching her blurred form. His sandals hover silently, just above the ground, wings trembling. He inches closer, careful not to meet her eyes, every heartbeat echoing through the cavern. Medusa sighs softly, the sound weary and human, and for that single breath she seems more victim than villain. Her serpents shift lazily, unaware that destiny crouches only paces away. The statues stand in solemn ranks, silent witnesses who cannot warn her. The cave feels colder now, the air thick with inevitability. You stand frozen, caught between them, knowing what must come, yet wishing it could unfold differently. This is not yet the clash of blades, but the stillness before the strike. The fragile moment where sorrow lingers heavy as stone before it is shattered by violence. The cave grows tighter with silence, and you sense the air straining as if the very stone waits for what must happen. Perseus crouches low, the mirrored shield angled its bronze face, quivering with torchlight reflections. In it, Medusa's form wavers a bowed figure, serpents stirring slowly, their scales catching faint gleams. The statues around you loom like witnesses at a trial, their frozen expressions etched in eternal dread. Perseus takes one step, then another. The sandals beat so faintly they sound like a whispering heartbeat. He dares not breathe too loudly. His fingers flex around the curved blade, the edge catching a ghostly shimmer from the shield. In the reflection, Medusa stirs. Her head lifts slightly, serpents rising, hissing as if they sense the intrusion. The sound rattles through the cavern, sharp and dry, like reeds swaying in a fierce wind. She turns her head, slowly, sorrowfully, as though listening. She cannot see him directly, but the snakes writhe with agitation. Their tongues dart at the air, tasting something unseen. Perseus freezes his eyes, locked on her reflection. His grip tightens, every muscle tense. Historians still argue whether this moment was meant to symbolize cleverness over brute force, the hero triumphing not by sheer strength, but by strategy, guided by Athena's wisdom. Some versions portray Perseus almost as a tool carrying out the goddess's will rather than his own. Others frame it as his true moment of courage, the instant where a mortal dares to step into the god's domain. Either way, you feel the weight of choice pressing like a blade against the cave's silence. A curious tidbit appears in ancient commentary. Some poets claimed the snakes hissed so loudly in that final moment that sailors passing far off at sea could hear the faint echo. They would whisper of storms on calm nights, blaming the noise on Medusa's serpents, writhing in fury. Whether superstition or poetry, the detail lingers like a shiver. Medusa finally raises her face, weary eyes half closed, unaware of the mirrored reflection watching her every movement. The snakes ripple across her scalp, restless, tasting the shifting air. Perseus inches closer, shield trembling slightly in his grasp. His breath comes slow, steady, trained by terror and necessity. You feel the cave tilt into stillness as if time itself waits. The statues stand ready, mouths agape, hands stretched in frozen warning. Medusa sighs once, the sound low, almost tender. And in that sigh you hear centuries of exile, the ache of loneliness, the crushing weight of a curse she never chose. Perseus grips the sword tighter. His reflection shows him lifting the blade-arm taut shield still between his eyes and hers. The sandals beat faintly, holding him poised in the air. Every nerve screams with tension. The serpents hiss louder now, coiling restless. And then the cave holds its breath. The shadow of the blade arcs upward in the mirror, a crescent of fate. Perseus is ready. The clash between sorrow and steel is about to break, and you, caught in the hush, No, you will never forget the weight of this silence before the strike. The cave holds its breath, and then the silence shatters. In the reflection of the polished bronze shield, you see Perseus's arm swing in a swift, practiced arc. The curved blade flashes like a crescent of moonlight slicing through the shadows. Medusa lifts her head fully in that instant, serpents hissing in alarm, eyes flaring with power that could freeze the world. But she never meets his gaze, only her own reflection in the shield. The strike is clean, sudden, final. The cave erupts with sound, the serpents shriek and writhe, their hisses a furious chorus, and the air itself trembles with the severing of fate. Perseus staggers as the weight of the blow sinks in, clutching the shield tighter, his breath harsh and fast. Medusa's body collapses, a mortal fall, echoing in a chamber filled with immortality. Her snakes twitch wildly, coiling and snapping even in death. The once living hair becomes a storm of dying fury around her fallen form. Historians still argue whether Perseus's killing of Medusa should be read as heroic triumph or tragic cruelty. Some describe him as the clever champion who conquered an unspeakable horror. Others suggest he was merely the chosen instrument of Athena, carrying out divine revenge against a victim of injustice. You stand in the cave, surrounded by statues and silence, and the ambiguity weighs heavier than the sword itself. A curious tidbit lingers in the myth. Some versions claim that in the moment Medusa's head was severed, the snakes let out a single, piercing cry, so loud it cracked stones on the cave floor. Shards of rock are said to have littered the lair, as though the island itself recoiled at the act. Whether truth or embellishment, the image clings to you, the earth itself, mourning her. Perseus kneels quickly, not daring to look upon the fallen face. He places the shield beside her body, and keeping his eyes averted, slips the head into a sack given to him by the gods. The serpents still writhe, faintly alive, though severed their hisses, muffled but not silenced. The weight of the sack feels far heavier than flesh alone. It is the burden of power, of destiny, of death, turned into a weapon. The statues in the cave remain unchanged, forever silent. Yet you imagine for a moment that they shudder, freed from her gaze only too late. They will never move again. They stand as grim witnesses to the clash, their stone lips parted in cries unheard. Medusa's sorrow lingers among them, a presence that even death cannot erase. Perseus straightens sword slick, with shadow shield trembling slightly in his grip. His breath slows, steadies the enormity of what he has done, pressing into his chest. He does not exult. There is no shout of victory, no smile of triumph. Only a heavy silence broken by the faint slither of serpents still alive inside the sack. The cave darkens as if in mourning, the torches sputtering low, their flames shivering in draughts that smell of blood and brine. You feel the hush fall again, deeper than before, as though the island itself has accepted the death of its most tragic daughter. The task is complete, but the story has only shifted. What Perseus carries now will change. Kingdoms topple tyrants and ripple through myth forever. You follow him as he steps back toward the cave mouth, the sack slung carefully over his shoulder. Behind him lies only stone and silent statues that will never move, and the memory of a woman whose curse became her prison. Ahead lies the open world, waiting to tremble at the sight of her severed head. The sandals lift him into the air once more, wings beating steadily. The cave mouth shrinks behind you, the sea roaring against cliffs below. The task is done. Yet the hissing still echoes faintly in your ears, and you realize the story has not ended with Medusa's fall. It has only taken on a more terrible shape. The sandals lift Perseus into the night air, but the cave behind him is not finished with its secrets. From the neck of Medusa's fallen body, the blood does not pool like mortal blood. It seethes glowing faintly, and from it new life bursts forth. You hover with him in the sky and watch as the impossible unfolds. First comes a flash of wings, white, gleaming, unfurling against the darkness. Out of the severed neck leaps Pegasus, the winged horse, his mane rippling like silver fire. He rears hooves, striking sparks on the rocky cave floor, then launches into the air, his wings carrying him upward in a rush of wind. For a moment he circles wild and unclaimed before vanishing into the distance, destined to bear heroes, yet unborn. Then more strange still emerges Chrysaor, whose name means golden blade. Some tales say he sprang fully armed, a warrior gleaming, others that he appeared as a monstrous giant, a figure half hidden by shadow. Historians still argue about his form, whether he was meant to represent conquest fertility or some fragment of an older myth woven into the story. What is certain is that Medusa, even in death, bore children of divine power, offspring of Poseidon, sired in that fateful temple long ago. A curious tidbit appears. In some versions it was said the earth itself trembled when Pegasus first struck his hooves upon it, and springs of pure water burst forth wherever he landed. One spring at Corinth was sacred to him, its waters shimmering in the sunlight as if touched by the mare's wings. Such stories transformed the tragedy of Medusa into marvels that shaped landscapes themselves. Perseus, hovering on his winged sandals, does not linger to marvel. He feels the weight of the sack at his side, the serpents still hissing faintly inside, and he knows his task is not complete. Yet the sight of Pegasus soaring into the night stirs something in him, a reminder that even from sorrow can spring wonder, even from death new stories take flight. The statues at the cave mouth remain frozen, silent guardians left behind. But the island is no longer the same. The air is charged as though Medusa's essence lingers in her children. You sense that her story has not ended here, but has scattered into the world, carried on, wings carried in blades, carried in whispers that will echo for centuries. Perseus steadies himself, turning his gaze away from the cavern that birthed both terror and miracles. The sandals beat harder, carrying him out over the sea once more. Spray lashes against his legs, the salt sharp on your tongue. In his hand the sword glimmers, still curved and ready, though the true weapon lies in the sack at his side. Below, the waves churn violently as though Poseidon himself rises in anger at the loss of his child and lover. The sea groans and whitecaps foam in fury, yet the sandals carry Perseus above the storm, higher and higher, where clouds part to reveal the cold, distant glitter of stars. The journey is not over. In truth, it has only grown heavier. Perseus has taken a head that turns life into stone, and from the wound it left behind, myths have multiplied. Pegasus, leaping toward the heavens, Chrysaor destined for a lineage of kings. Even in her death, Medusa reshapes the world. As you drift with Perseus into the night, the air hums with the echo of wings, some belonging to the boy, some perhaps still trailing faintly behind the horse, born from blood. The cave fades into darkness, but its legacy has already broken free, riding the winds into legend. The sky opens vast above you, the sandals carrying Perseus far from the jagged cliffs of Medusa's island. The sack at his side sways heavily, serpents hissing faintly, within their sound muffled but unnerving like coals that refuse to die. He clutches the polished shield, close the curved sword, still gleaming faintly, but it is the unseen weight of his prize that presses hardest on his shoulders. He has slain the Gorgon, yet his trials are not over. The sandals bear him swiftly over the restless sea. Waves below rise in fury, frothing white, as though Poseidon himself thrashes in anger at the death of his monstrous daughter. Perseus leans into the wind, the salty spray kissing his face heart, steady despite the storm beneath. Ahead, new trials wait, though he cannot yet see them. Historians still argue whether the next episodes in Perseus's journey were original to the myth or added later to weave his story into other legends. Some suggest the tale of Medusa was once separate, joined to Perseus, only when poets needed to glorify his adventures. Others believe it was always a single path, each trial flowing inevitably into the next. Standing here, you cannot untangle the threads, you only feel how tightly they pull him forward. A curious tidbit surfaces in certain versions. It is said Perseus, weary from flight, rested briefly atop Atlas's mountain. When the Titan refused him shelter, Perseus revealed the Gorgon's head, turning him into the very peak itself, his massive shoulders becoming the rocky crags. Thus the great Atlas mountain was explained through myth, the petrified body of a being too proud to bend. But not all encounters are so harsh. As Perseus flies onward, he sees distant shores dotted with villages, the smoke of cooking fires curling lazily into the sky. Children run along beaches, pointing upward at the strange figure sailing across the heavens. Their parents pull them back, whispering prayers to ward against omens, unsure whether the winged youth is a blessing or a curse. You imagine how his image must have lingered in their stories, an echo of gods crossing the skies. The journey is not easy. Winds buffet him, storms rise suddenly, and the sack grows heavier by the mile. Each time the head stirs, serpents writhing inside Perseus feels the chill of its power creep through the fabric. He tightens the knot again and again, refusing to let even a sliver of its gaze escape. Night deepens and the stars gleam coldly above. Perseus steadies himself, wings beating tirelessly, though his eyes grow heavy. You fly beside him, watching as his silhouette cuts across the moonlit sky, a mortal boy caught in the machinery of legend. The sea hums below, endless, and the faint cry of gulls drifts up from unseen islands. At last, land rises ahead, rugged coasts, sharp ridges and valleys hidden in mist. He has left the cave behind, but fate is not finished with him. In the sack at his side, Medusa's power murmurs restlessly, as though impatient to be used. Pegasus has flown free, Chrysaea has vanished into mystery, but the weight Perseus carries now will shape the destiny of kings. You exhale, feeling the air rush colder as he descends slightly, scanning the land below. His sandals beat in rhythm, steady but weary wings flashing briefly in moonlight. The horizon glows faintly with dawn, a reminder that though one night's horror has ended, another day's trials wait to begin. The dawn spills pale gold over the horizon, and Perseus glides toward it, the wings of his sandals whispering with every beat. The sack at his side shifts uneasily, serpents inside, still alive, still hissing faintly as though they resent being carried away from their lair. The air grows warmer, the scent of salt softens into something floral, and soon a distant cry rises above the waves, a human cry, sharp and desperate. You lean forward with him, scanning the coast below, where jagged rocks jut from the surf like broken teeth. The chain to a cliff by the sea is Andromeda. Her arms stretch outward, shackled to stone, her hair whipped by wind, her eyes wide with terror. Behind her, the ocean roils violently, and from its depths you glimpse the dark shape of a sea monster, rising its coils thrashing in the foam. Perseus slows his sandals, hovering, heart hammering, as he takes in the sight. He has slain the Gorgon, but here is another horror, waiting a trial unasked, for yet impossible to ignore. Historians still argue whether the tale of Andromeda was always part of Perseus's cycle, or whether later poets stitched it in to magnify his heroism. Some note how the motif of a chained maiden threatened by a monster appears in many traditions, suggesting an archetype older than Greece. Others believe it was invented to anchor Perseus to Ethiopia's legendary kings, weaving myth into imagined geography. Whatever the truth, the image endures: a girl bound to rock a monster rising and a hero descending from the skies. A curious tidbit lingers in ancient commentary. Some said Andromeda's chains were so finely crafted that poets marveled at them as works of art, describing the gleam of bronze against the stone. Others claimed the chains themselves were woven from seaweed, hardened by Poseidon's will, shimmering green in the sun. Each version adds a different glint to the same tragic picture. Perseus hovers, eyes darting between maiden and monster. The crowd on shore screams encouragement and prayers, their voices nearly drowned by crashing waves. They had offered Andromeda as sacrifice, hoping to appease the gods and save their kingdom from ruin. You feel Perseus's jaw tighten as he sees her helpless form, innocent, condemned by the pride of her parents and the hunger of the sea. The sea creature bursts upward with a roar, scales flashing like molten bronze jaws snapping wide. Water cascades around it, the tide surging higher, Andromeda straining against her bonds. Perseus reacts without hesitation. He darts downward, sandals beating furiously, sword flashing in sunlight. He strikes from above, plunging the curved blade into the monster's hide. The beast thrashes, shrieking, waves exploding against the cliffs. You cling to the air beside him, feeling each violent crash as he slashes again, shield raised to deflect spray and teeth. The sack at his side swings heavily, serpents hissing louder as if sensing the chaos. Perseus fights fiercely, cutting deep, until at last the monster gives a final convulsion and sinks back into the frothing depths. The waves settle, foam curling gently around Andromeda's feet. The shore erupts with cries of relief. Fishermen and nobles alike fall to their knees, praising the gods, praising the stranger who flew from the sky. Perseus hovers before Andromeda, slicing through her chains with one sure stroke. She stumbles forward into his arms, trembling, her eyes still wide with disbelief. The air softens as the danger fades, though the smell of brine and blood lingers heavy. Perseus steadies her, speaking softly, though his words are lost to the wind. What matters is the gentleness in his movements, the way he guides her safely to shore. The people rush to meet them, their voices rising in a tide of gratitude and awe. As you watch from the edge of the surf, you realize the story has shifted again. Perseus is no longer just the slayer of Medusa. He has become a savior, his legend branching outward like a river flowing into new lands and new tales. And still at his side, the sack weighs heavy, the hiss of serpents, whispering that one story's ending remains a weapon waiting to be used. The people of the shore gather close, their voices rising in a chorus of awe. You walk among them, feeling the heat of their bodies, the press of their gratitude. Fishermen with salt still on their hands bow low. Nobles, clutching embroidered robes, kneel as though before a god. Perseus stands at the center, the winged sandals still gleaming faintly, the curved sword dripping sea foam, and Andromeda at his side, her wrists raw where the chains had bitten. Her eyes follow him with quiet wonder, and already whispers ripple through the crowd. She will not be merely a rescued maiden, but the bride of a hero. Her parents, King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia, emerge from the throng, their crowns dulled by salt spray, their pride bent under the weight of gratitude. They offer Perseus not only their daughter's hand, but also a place in their lineage. The people cheer, voices echoing off the cliffs, their cries mixing with the hiss of receding waves. You can almost taste the relief in the air, sharp as the salt itself, as though an entire kingdom has inhaled deeply for the first time in years. Historians still argue whether the Andromeda episode represents a merging of foreign tales into Greek myth, perhaps borrowed from Eastern legends of maidens and monsters. Others see it as allegory, a symbolic marriage between hero and distant land uniting Greece with imagined Ethiopia in mythic geography. But here, standing in the sun's warmth after storm and terror, you see only the immediacy of joy, the human need to celebrate survival. A curious tidbit surfaces in later retellings. Some poets claimed that even as Perseus freed Andromeda drops of the sea, monsters' blood turned into strange red corals along the shore. Divers in those lands would later claim the reefs blushed, with her rescue eternal reminders of the monster's fall. Whether truth or embellishment, the detail adds color to the waves still foaming at your feet. The feast begins that very night. Fires blaze in long pit-spitted meats, turning slowly, their juices crackling as flames leap. Musicians strike up flutes and drums, their rhythms spilling into the starlit sky. Dancers twirl with ribbons, their shadows leaping against torch-lit walls. Andromeda sits near Perseus, their faces close, their voices mingling softly even as the revelry swells. She looks at him not with fear, but with the steady recognition of one who has seen her life balanced on the edge of death and restored by his hand. Yet even amid the joy, Perseus remains wary. At his side, hidden carefully, the sack still weighs heavily. The serpents hiss faintly inside, audible only when the music lulls like a whisper that refuses to fade. He does not draw attention to it, yet he cannot forget it. While others feast and laugh, he sits with a quiet edge, knowing that the head of Medusa is more than a trophy. It is a force of death, a weapon that demands caution. The feast lingers long into the night, cups brimming, voices hoarse from song. Yet in the back of the hall you notice shadows among the celebrants, men whose eyes linger on Perseus with envy. For not all welcome a hero so easily, not all rejoice in promises of marriage to a stranger who soared from the skies. Even as joy swells, tension gathers in silence, coiling like serpents in the dark. Perseus does not yet see it, his hand resting gently over Andromeda's as the firelight flickers in her eyes. But you, watching closely, sense the storm that lies ahead, not of waves and monsters, but of human pride, ambition, and resentment. For though gods and beasts can be faced with sword and shield, the envy of men is a subtler foe, one that waits its turn patiently. And so the night wanes, filled with music and shadows, both while the sea hums softly against the shore. Perseus has won Andromeda, but the sack at his side still hisses faintly, and you know its moment has not yet passed. The feast dwindles, torches gutter low, and dawn spills across the sea with a weary light. You stand in the hall where laughter has given way to murmurs, and the air feels heavy with unease. Perseus, seated beside Andromeda, does not yet see the shift in the crowd, but you do. Men whisper at the edges, relatives of her former betrothed nobles whose pride smoulders like coals. They had promised Andromeda to Phineus, her uncle, long before Perseus descended from the sky. To them, this union with a stranger is theft. Phineus himself storms into the hall, his eyes sharp, his face flushed with fury. He carries his spear as though the feast were a battlefield. That maiden is mine, his voice cuts through the chamber, and no winged youth will steal what was sworn to me. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Andromeda's mother shrinks back. Her father raises trembling hands to calm the storm. But the air is already too charged for peace. Perseus rises slowly, his sword still at his side, but his voice calm. He speaks of fate, of the monster slain, of the gods' clear will, that Andromeda was saved for him. Yet his words fall into the clamor of defiance. Phineus's allies surge forward, weapons raise their shadows, spilling long across the stone floor. You feel the tension snap, the envy of men unleashed in a hall that moments before rang with song. Historians still argue whether this confrontation reflects older traditions of bride contests where suitors battled to claim a woman's hand, or whether it was woven later to showcase the terrible power of Medusa's head. Some versions downplay it, others embellish it with vivid detail, yet all agree on one outcome: Perseus would not yield. A curious tidbit lingers in Roman retellings. They claimed that as Phineus shouted, a dove perched in the rafters froze in place, foreshadowing what would soon happen to men below. Omens slipped into myth like shadows in sunlight, subtle yet heavy with dread. The fight begins. Spears clash against shields, the hall erupting in chaos. Nobles scatter, servants cry out, and the sound of metal rings against stone. Perseus moves quickly, sandals flashing as he leaps aside, parrying strikes, defending himself from the onslaught of men, emboldened by Phineus's fury. Andromeda clings to her mother, eyes wide with terror, as the hall becomes a battlefield. But Perseus is not alone. At his side, still hidden but waiting, lies the sack that holds Medusa's head. His hand brushes it once, twice, as if considering. At last, with no choice left, he unties the knot and turns aside, raising the severed head high. The hiss fills the hall like a sudden storm. Serpents writhe, their eyes blazing, even in death, their tongues flickering in fury. Men freeze mid-stride, their war cries caught in their throats, their limbs stiffening. One by one they harden into statues, their faces twisted in anger, fear, or defiance. Phineus stands at the center, arm lifted, spear aimed, but his body turns to stone before the thrust can land. The hall falls silent. Where once a mob of men roared, only statues remain frozen in the act of rebellion. Their marble eyes stare endlessly, unblinking, their mouths open as if still shouting. The torches sputter shadows, stretching over stone forms that were living flesh moments before. Perseus lowers the head, slipping it quickly back into the sack, his chest heaving with breath. Around him, the survivors shrink back, their fear outweighing their fury. They see now what he carries, not just the courage of a hero, but the power of a curse, a weapon no mortal can withstand. Andromeda rushes to him, her hands trembling as she grips his arm. Her eyes search his face, not with fear, but with awe and gratitude. The hall is filled with statues now, silent witnesses to the weight of his choice. You feel the air thicken with a strange calm, the kind that follows lightning strike. Perseus has proven not only his strength, but the inevitability of his destiny. The envy of men lies petrified around him, silent forever, while he and Andromeda step forward into a future reshaped by stone. The statues in the hall glimmer in the half-light, their marble faces frozen forever in fury and defiance. You walk among them slowly, hearing the faint echo of what had once been cries, laughter, and music. Now there is only silence, as if time itself had hardened here. Perseus lowers the sack carefully, his shoulders heavy, his breath still uneven. He does not look upon the figures he has made, though they surround him on every side. Outside, word spreads quickly. The people murmur of what happened in the hall, of Phineus's pride, and the head that silenced him. Some speak of Perseus with awe, others with fear. The power he carries is not just that of a hero, it is divine and dreadful, a force that blurs the line between man and God. Parents hush their children when his name is mentioned, uncertain whether to bless or fear the sound. Yet in the quiet corners of temples and taverns, stories sprout. They describe how Perseus, armed with the Gorgon's head, could turn armies to stone, how even kings bowed before him. Historians still argue whether this part of the myth reflects real anxieties about weapons too powerful to control objects that shifted the balance of power beyond human hands. To some, Medusa's head symbolizes ultimate defense, to others, ultimate tyranny. A curious tidbit survives in ancient ritual practice. Images of Medusa's face, the Gorgonaean, were painted on shields, carved into doorways, even stamped onto coins. People believed her image warded off evil, that her gaze, though deadly, could protect when controlled. What began as a curse became a charm, an icon that lingered long after the stories of Perseus were first told. Perseus, though, seems weary of his burden. He keeps the sack close but avoids touching it, as if the serpent's muffled hiss might seep into his dreams. He and Andromeda depart quietly, leaving the hall of statues behind. The sea air greets them again, cool and sharp, a reminder that the world beyond still waits. You follow as they journey onward, their shadows stretching together across the sand. Perseus no longer feels like a boy. There is a gravity in his steps, the knowledge that he carries not only a bride and a story, but also a weapon of gods and monsters. Andromeda walks beside him silently, her eyes fixed on him with trust. Yet you see her gaze flick once toward the sack, her expression unreadable. The land passes beneath their sandals, and footsteps, villages, fields, cliffs battered by waves. Everywhere they go, whispers precede them. Some kneel in gratitude, others turn away in fear. The line between savior and danger blurs wherever Perseus carries the Gorgon's head. You feel the tension grow heavier, as if each new step presses him closer to a reckoning. Night falls and they rest beneath a sky alive with stars. Perseus lies back on the earth, the sack resting a few feet away, his arm never straying far from it. Andromeda gazes upward, tracing constellations, her voice soft as she wonders aloud if the gods might one day place their story in the heavens. Her words drift like a prayer, weaving into the night air. You close your eyes with them, listening to the sea's rhythm, the rustle of leaves, the faint hiss from the sack. The world feels suspended, balanced between fear and hope. The story has travelled far from Athena's temple now, yet the weight of that curse still guides its path. Perseus is not finished. His legend is not yet carved fully in stone. The sandals carry Perseus and Andromeda farther still, back across seas and rugged coasts until the cliffs of Seriphos rise on the horizon. The waves strike hard against the rocks, and the salty wind carries the murmur of rumors, stories of a tyrant's cruelty, of a queen's sorrow, of a hero long believed dead. You step ashore with them, the sand cold beneath your feet, the sack swaying heavily at Perseus's side. Inside, the serpents hiss, faintly restless, as though they too sense that destiny waits in these halls. In the palace, Polydectes still reigns. His voice fills the chamber, mocking Danae, Perseus's mother, who has resisted his unwanted advances. Courtiers smirk behind their hands, confident their king is untouchable. But then the doors burst open, and Perseus strides in sword at his hip shield on his arm, and Andromeda close behind. The air shifts instantly, the laughter dies, whispers scatter like startled birds. Polydectes sneers, his pride undimmed. "So the boy returns," he says, his words dripping with disdain. "And what gift do you bring me, since you boast so boldly?" Perseus does not answer with words. Instead, he reaches for the sack, loosening its knot. The room stiffens with unease, courtiers shifting nervously as the faint hiss of serpents escapes. Historians still argue whether this moment should be read as justice or vengeance. Some accounts portray Perseus as righteous, defending his mother's honor against a tyrant. Others see it as the cruelty of myth, a hero wielding too much power, turning men to stone without hesitation. The debate lingers like a shadow across centuries. Where does justice end and terror begin? A curious tidbit from later storytellers claims that Polydectes laughed even as Perseus drew forth the head-mocking until the last heartbeat. His expression, they said, remained frozen in arrogant amusement even as his body hardened to marble. Visitors to Seriphos were told they could still see him standing there, a statue, mid-laughter, a warning against pride. Perseus lifts the head high, and the serpents writhe their eyes, blazing even in death. The courtiers shriek, but it is too late. One by one their bodies stiffen, breath cut short, limbs locked in sudden stillness. Polydectes himself falters mid-jeer, his mouth open in scorn that will never close. The hall fills with silence, broken only by the faint scrape of stone as the last man stiffens. When it is done, Perseus lowers the head, slipping it back into the sack. Around him, statues stand in grim array, their lifelike forms caught in a moment of disbelief. Danae rushes forward, tears bright in her eyes, embracing her son. Andromeda stands quietly at his side, her hand brushing his arm, steadying him. The hall, once filled with tyranny, has become a mausoleum of stone. Outside, the people gather, hearing what has passed. Some cheer, others fall silent in awe, but all know that Seriphos has been changed forever. The tyrant is gone not by revolt or war, but by the curse of a woman long dead, carried in the hand of a mortal who became more than mortal. Perseus breathes deeply, his burden at last beginning to ease. He will soon return the head to Athena, who will set it upon her shield, the aegis, where its power will guard rather than destroy. Medusa's gaze, once a curse of exile, will become a divine emblem, feared yet revered. And so you walk with him out of the hall into the salt air, where dawn spreads gently across the horizon. The sea glimmers calm, no longer thundering with Poseidon's wrath. Perseus has completed his journey from youth mocked in a tyrant's court to hero armed by gods, to slayer of monsters and savior of kingdoms. Yet behind every triumph lies Medusa, her sorrow, her snakes, her stare, echoing forever through stone and story. The story slows now, its sharp edges softening like waves, fading into calm tide. You step away from the statues and the storms, away from the clash of gods and mortals, and find yourself under a sky of fading stars. The air is cool, the earth steady, and the frantic hiss of serpents has drifted into silence. You lean back against the soft ground, imagining the constellations above. In some versions of the tale, Perseus and Andromeda are set among the stars by grateful gods, their forms shining forever in the night sky. Medusa, too, is remembered there, her head placed as a cluster of stars, a reminder that even in death her story could not be erased. The heavens carry them all, hero and maiden monster, and victim, each point of light a whisper of memory. The myths remind you that fear and wonder are often entwined. Medusa's curse turned men to stone, yet her image later guarded homes and temples, her face a talisman of protection. What begins as terror can over time soften into symbol, into something that endures without menace. You let that thought linger, like the glow of starlight across a still sea. Your breathing slows as you picture the cave, quiet now, statues standing unmoving, while the waves wash the shore endlessly. Perseus has gone, Andromeda is safe. Athena's aegis glimmers with new power, but in this moment none of that matters. Only the hush remains, the silence after struggle, the gentle reminder that all stories, no matter how fierce, eventually come to rest. Let yourself drift with it, surrendering to stillness, to the calm rhythm of your own breath, to the softness of night embracing you. You are safe now, you are held. Sleep carries you gently like wings across a dark sky. Sweet dreams.